Why are we being asked to apologize, to pay reparations? Writing someone a check is not going to undo what someone feels about their history.
What if we're still profiting from it?
But we all profit. That people all over the world are living a life that they may not have led if slaves hadn't been used. We know that. Every city, every building.
When people hear the word reparations, they often imagine it as a demand for a handout, a plea to make others feel guilty about something that happened long ago. But what if it's not about guilty at all? What if it's about math, about an unpaid bill that keeps collecting interest every single day? See, the conversation around reparations for slavery isn't really about the past. It's about the present cost of unpaid debt. It's about systems built on stolen labor, land, and even life, and the nations still profiting from those crimes. Yet, in the United Kingdom and across much of the Western world, the argument remains: no one alive today owned slaves. But here's the thing: even if no one alive committed those crimes, everyone alive continues to benefit or suffer from their legacy. And that is what makes this conversation so uncomfortable to so many people and so necessary.
No living British citizen was part of the slave trade. And we're not responsible, any of us living today, for the crimes of dead slave traders. So why are we being asked to apologize, to pay reparations? Writing someone a check is not going to undo what someone feels about their history.
What if we're still profiting from it?
But we all profit. That people all over the world are living a life that they may not have led if slaves hadn't been used. We know that.
Yasmin disagrees.
Every building built by slaves.
This from someone. Okay, you live in a country. Listen, can I speak? You live in a country which, after the First World War, Germany was absolutely forced to pay reparations, and they're still paying off. Oh, the Brits don't worry about that. They've never said, oh well, living young Germans had nothing to do with that. Japan was made to pay huge reparation bills. Somehow Britain, when called upon to at least make a gesture, the royals actually benefited hugely. So did Tate and Lyle. So I find it so extraordinary that's when you disengage.
But they lost a war, Japan and Germany.
Yeah, yes, reparations was insisted on. Nobody said, okay, we're going to forget this, it happened, it's history. When it suits us, right? And I think Jamaica, I have a lot of Jamaican friends, they wouldn't have been this exercised because they have been fond of the royals. Without the Windrush scandal. That really shocked them.
Something odd is happening with this trip. I don't quite get it. I can't work out. Firstly, this idea that a letter has been written by 100 Jamaican leaders, that sounds like a lot of people, but then 100 leaders? And then the other thing is, I thought William and Kate had people saying, look, watch, this is going to be a tricky one. But obviously nobody said that to them. So they keep going to places where they're told they're not welcome.
Well, I think Barbados started something by declaring itself a republic and dissociating from that. But I think the Windrush scandal has had a real impact.
But now
bobsleighing, by the way.
It seems crazy to me that we're making moral judgments today in the 21st century about what happened 200 years. We had Tony Blair apologizing for the potato famine, saying he said he was expressed his sorrow and regret for something that happened a century before he was born.
But I think
it's nonsense. It's empty gesture politics.
Carol, that's decency.
It's
not
absolutely
decency.
No, it isn't. It's empty gesture.
Do you know that the effects of slavery are still playing out among Black Americans and in the Caribbean? It isn't over for them.
So how do you think writing a check is
extraordinary?
How is writing a check going to solve their problem?
Oh, I think
what they might feel in the head.
A little bit.
How? Tell me how. Explain how.
It is one of the poorest countries in the world.
So you think that, no, that, never mind because it's one of the poorest countries. How is it going to help what they feel about slavery? How is it going to change what they feel?
They will feel it has been acknowledged.
That's what they
you
say.
can't just you don't
acknowledge things with money.
I'm sorry.
Show you care.
I'm sorry. You can't just dismiss a history because it doesn't agree with you.
You know, I'm pretty sure that, you know, the next generation, our descendants, are going to talk about us in the way we're now talking about what happened 200 years ago. You know, are they going to criticize us for burning fossil fuels? Are they going to criticize us for letting kids have sex changes and start taking hormones aged 14?
Was it?
So we're going every age has wrongdoing.
My question was just that was it that long ago? And here's why I asked that. I was born in 1965. Lincoln was shot in 1865. So only 100 years before I was born. He's the guy who said, we're not having slavery in the state. It doesn't seem, suddenly to me now, it doesn't seem that long ago.
But let's just get over this myth. There were people in this country, women in particular, who while the slave trade was going on, absolutely opposed it on moral grounds. The Quakers in America and here.
But we got out ahead
our
of
sensibility.
But that's the point.
They knew.
But we got out ahead of the States, didn't we, on some of this stuff? You
had the abolitionists, the abolition with William, but actually, by that time, a lot of women weren't buying sugar because they thought, and what's his name, the potter. The famous potter,
Stoke. Is it Wedgwood?
They made these beautiful plaques of slaves looking up and you know, messages saying this is wrong.
Okay.
They knew.
All right, so it's still very current for some.
Those who reject reparations often insist that you can fix history without a check. They call it impractical, symbolic, even divisive. But history shows us the world does pay, it does pay debts, just not to black people. Germany paid reparations for the Holocaust. Japan paid reparations for wartime atrocities. Even banks and corporations have issued settlements for wrongdoings that happened before most of their current employees were born. So why does the math suddenly become too complicated when the bill belongs to black people? You know, descendants of enslaved Africans. Supporters of reparations argue that the economic harm wasn't a moment in history. It's an unbroken chain. Britain didn't stop extracting wealth, it rebranded it, mining gold from Ghana, profiting from the Caribbean ports, keeping stolen African artifacts behind glass at the British Museum, and, you know, charging admission for it. That is not history. That's happening right now. And if crime never truly stopped, why should the payment? Reparations aren't just about money. They are about power, because money in this world is power. Without money, you don't have power. It builds schools, it buys land, it funds media business and influence. It shapes who gets heard and who gets ignored. When enslaved people were freed, they were freed with nothing. No land, no compensation, no tools to rebuild what had been stolen. Meanwhile, nations like Britain were compensated. Not the enslaved, but the slave owners. The British government actually paid off the debts owed to former slave owners as late as 2015. Think about it. The public, including descendants of enslaved Africans, paid taxes that went toward compensating those who once owned their ancestors. So when critics say reparations are unrealistic, they forget that reparations have already been paid, just never to the victims. Now, here's what that means today. Every bank loan denied because of a black name. Every neighborhood red line, every job application tossed aside before the interview, every missing piece of generational wealth that could have been invested, inherited or built upon is a small daily payment on a debt that never went away. Reparations aren't about making white people feel bad. They are about correcting an ongoing theft, one that's hidden in trade agreements, resource extraction, and global finance. Because while many think slave ended centuries ago, it's just that financial systems changed uniforms. The slave trade became colonial trade, plantations became corporations, chains became contracts. Today, Britain still mines gold from Ghana. It still profits from Caribbean ports. It still holds cultural artifacts from Kenya, Zimbabwe, and even Somalia, and turns them into museum profits. So let me say this. This isn't ancient history. It's the same exploitation, just rebranded and politely legalized. And that is what the demand for reparation exposes. A fear of what Black people might do with economic power. A fear that once financial independence is achieved, control will shift. Because if Black communities had the means to fund their own schools, own their own banks, and invest in their own industries, they wouldn't need validation, access, or even approval from the very systems built to exclude them. Reparations are about more than justice. They are about balance. They are about saying, you profited from our pain, now pay the price. But let's be clear, reparations don't erase the past. They don't heal trauma. They simply level the field, providing the means for communities to rebuild what was stolen, not out of pity, but out of principle. Because the wealth that built empires like Britain and America didn't appear from nowhere. It came from somewhere, from someone, from millions of lives whose sweat and blood formed the foundation of today's global economy. And the truth is, the world's richest nations are still living off the stolen inheritance. So when people say it's too late for reparations, I ask, too late for whom? Because those still living under the weight of that unpaid debt, it's not over. The trauma didn't end in 1833. The extraction didn't end in 1888. It's still happening in boardrooms, trade deals, and museum galleries. This isn't about turning back time. It's about finally cashing the check that history wrote and the world refused to honor. So yes, the question of reparation is uncomfortable. It should be because it forces us to admit that freedom without repair isn't freedom. It's unfinished business. And maybe the real fear isn't about how much will cost, but about what equality will look like once the debt is finally paid. Well, guys, I now want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Drop a comment below, and also remember to subscribe, like, and share as well. And until next time, bye-bye.